It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear. So?
Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to Science on Top. This is episode 210 for Monday the 7th of December 2015. I'm Ed Brown and today I'm joined by Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
And Lucas Randall.
Hello.
It's a great show today. We're going to be looking at insects that aren't bees but play just as important a role in pollinating crops, the evolution of modern humans and how agriculture has affected our genomes, and the mystery of the blue tarantulas. But first, fast radio bursts, or FRBs as they're known, are sudden, very short blasts of radio waves that have so far defied explanation. They last for just a few thousandths of a second, but they make a big impression on radio telescopes, and they were first discovered here in Australia by the Parkes Radio Telescope in 2007. And now, the most detailed study so far has provided some clues to the origins of these fast radio bursts. Lucas?
Well, yeah, and as you say, they've been discovered many times. Actually, they typically they're found lurking in data sets when scientists go back and sort of trawl through observations, and the observatories that are used to pick these things up, which are radio observatories, they tend to look at fairly wide areas of sky. They're not sort of the pinpoint instruments that you used to think of with things like Hubble that are working in the optical range. Radio waves is a whole different kettle of fish. So it's pretty hard to sort of narrow down exactly where they come from. So basically, this team has gone through and they've scoured a whole lot of archive data. And they found one particular pulse that they made the subject of their study, which I think they went through something like 650 hours of archive data or something or other. And they were using this algorithm that they designed specifically to look for this particular pattern. And what they found, because they had to take into account, what would happen to a signal if it was traveling through space over a long period of time, because of course things get redshifted there, they get stretched out. So, the algorithm took that into consideration. And they found a particular signal which was then named, it was named FRB 110523, so you can get to feel really sort of close to this thing. From the 23rd, it was based on an original observation on in May 2011, and this one they ascertained that it came from as far as 6 billion light years away. It's basically halfway across the universe, which is quite a distance away. But it's out to that range. It's not definitely from that particular range. So it could have been much closer. The difficult part, of course, is figuring out, well, we know the direction it came from, but we can't pinpoint a particular galaxy that it came from. So basically, they had to look at the pattern of light. What they found was that the light sort of arrived. And when I say light, of course, radio waves are a type of light. The light arrived in a sort of a spiral pattern, and from that they inferred that the light had travelled through like a magnetized region of space. They also figured out that the light had been basically scattered really early in its journey, and that indicated that it came through some sort of dense cloud of plasma. So these things together basically point to a star-forming region, because they're the sort of conditions that you would find in a star-forming region. So, you think of something like the Orion Nebula is a great example of a star-forming region where there's a lot of gas, there's a lot of stuff going on, there's a lot of stars that are forming, and a lot of magnetism, because of these things that are forming. It also indicated that because of the pattern, it could have originated from a starquake. Basically, it's more or less like an earthquake, but it's on a star. It's when something causes this massive disruption in the surface of a star, and it even happens on our sun. We've seen it in observations there as well, and it's amazing how quickly it spreads across the surface of a star. And So that would cause this particular pattern as well. There are a few other candidates that could have caused. It could have been, for example, a magnetar, which is a very strongly magnetized neutron star. Neutron stars are very, very small. A magnetar is one of those very interesting objects out there, because it took a long, long time for scientists to figure out what on earth was causing these incredible observations that they were getting. It could also have been something like a big neutron star that might have suddenly collapsed to form a black hole, which is something that can happen. It's got its own name as well, which is a blitzar. So there's all these cool sort of objects out there that can cause these weird effects. But as I say, the indication is that it's one of these types of things. And of course, we've heard about these things for ages. And there was a story a little while ago about what was it? They were talking about maybe it was some sort of Dyson sphere being constructed around a star. You hear about these things which are unexplained, and of course, there's a whole lot of there's a whole lot of rhetoric that's thrown out there about what it could be. Yeah, it must be aliens, and that's true of these types of radio bursts as well. That's been proposed before that maybe it's aliens. There were some that even thought it was just you apply Occam's razor to these things, and one of the first things you look for is there just a fault in equipment, and that was certainly applied to the first observations that were noticed. There had been other ones in the past that, for example, there was a type of radio signals that had been detected in the past which turned out to be caused by opening a microwave door near the in
the kitchen of the telescope.
Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah,
that's embarrassing. That's just embarrassing. But then that reminds me also of the. Do you remember the story about the discoverers of the cosmic microwave background, which is something that's now all pervasive in so much of astronomy? The cosmic microwave background has got so many implications for us in understanding the age of the universe and the size of the universe and the distribution of things in the universe and so forth. And for a while, they thought that there was an equipment fault. They thought maybe it was pigeon poo or something or other that was on their detector. They went through all sorts of things to try and eliminate this annoying background signal that they just couldn't get rid of because it's everywhere.
Oh wait, it's the universe.
It's the universe playing jokes. So they're things that astronomers have got to go through to figure out, is this just an anomaly? Is it an anomaly that's been caused by us? And in this case, they found a good candidate signal that they could apply some science to and figure out that, okay, there are some really good potential explanations for this. And there's really, it's down to those two scenarios as I explained. So, it's kind of cool.
Kiyoshi Masui from the University of British Columbia, who's the lead author of the study, he was asked, so do you think it is a starquake that's causing these things? And he said, look, if you forced me to put money on something, I'd say yes, it's a starquake, but I wouldn't be very confident in that bet. So even though he's just done a pretty in-depth study of it, he's still like, we don't really know. But I love that these are really high energy bursts. Kiyoshi also says, there was a quote, he was asked how energetic they are, and he says they have as much energy as the sun puts out in 10,000 years, put out in 1 millisecond.
Yeah, so you can, a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it has to be that high energy for us to be able to detect it from how many billion light years away did you say?
Well, up to 6 billion light years.
6 billion light years, yeah. And even then, when they get here, they're still strong enough to make a big impact. But
yeah, absolutely. Even after being scattered, as they've left a planetary nebula, for example, it's very cool.
Very cool indeed. Okay, well, let's have a look at the insect world now. And we tend to think of bees as the great pollinators. And while they are certainly the most efficient, a new study suggests that other insects are just as important for the success of the world's crops. Penny, we're talking flies, wasps, beetles, butterflies, all sorts of things, aren't we?
Yeah, a whole lot of things. And I thought this was interesting because we've covered a few stories in the past on Science on Top of about the colony collapse disorder of honeybees and the kind of terrifying implications that might have for the world's agriculture. But what this study has found is that we are possibly underestimating the amount that insects that are not bees contribute to crop pollination and other plants. And these other insects, or to be honest, the mix of other insects that are not bees, might be a bit more robust in terms of not depending as much on sort of remnant wild vegetation. So they made the observation that there was a lot of insects around that are not bees, and decided to have a look.
That's quite an observation. Hey, there's a lot of insects that aren't bees.
There are a lot of insects that aren't bees, but it's also they're around at particular times at particular crops and so on. So what are they doing there?
Yep.
Are they doing anything well, what we would consider useful insect pollination, or are they just kind of freeloading insects?
They're just wandering around.
Yeah, and what's their contribution? Like, are all these other insects contributing 5% of pollination or what? And what they found is, having a look at 17 different crops across 5 continents and different kinds of like agricultural systems, they found that non-bee insects formed about 25 to 50% of the flower visits. So even though
25 to 50?
Yeah, so
That's
we've been saying...
huge percentage.
It's exactly like, oh no bees, we're all going to die. And I'm not making light of.
We've all been saying it's a huge problem. We've all been saying
it's a huge problem, and it is a huge problem. But what this suggests is that other insects might provide us with a bit of sort of insurance. Pollination will still continue to happen, even if bees aren't around to do it. And even though these other insects are less effective than bees, they visit flowers a lot more than bees, and so overall pollination happens about the same in a similar way.
So they're kind of like a backup plan.
Yeah, almost. And I'm guessing if you just think about the way evolution works, if the bee niche goes, something's going to fill it.
Yep.
And they're also really important for crops that are not attractive to bees, and I guess mangoes would be the standout one, but the other ones are not entirely mainstream crops. Custard apples and soursop was the other one they mentioned.
Okay.
And yeah, I know. Custard apples are really nice, but they're not exactly, And bees don't even like these ones. So there are some crops that really depend on other animals already to be pollinated.
Yeah.
So all these other insects, because they're not just one species, they're going to have a different range of habitats, of needs, requirements. And if they're providing 50% of pollination, then that's actually quite reassuring.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible to think that bees are in danger, but at least we're not in danger as much as we thought.
But
from a very selfish perspective.
But also that diversity among these non-bee insects means that they're much more robust, and whatever can wipe out all the bees, for example, is unlikely to wipe out flies and wasps.
Insect.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that's very cool. That's reassuring, but I think we still need to figure out how to stop the colony collapse disorder.
Bee,
yes.
But it's nice to know that there's
an insurance plan.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I think it's probably worthwhile pointing out that this is great news, that there's other things that, that can fill this void potentially, but the same doesn't apply for things like, the atmosphere. We don't have a different atmosphere.
Oh, no.
There's nothing else that can do the thing the atmosphere does. There's bigger problems as well than just the bees. But, no, that just sort of struck me on the thing. This goes, scientists have found that even the bees don't matter anymore. So, screw the atmosphere. No, I'm not. I wasn't suggesting. I could see how some would take it.
Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, a bit of good news. Therefore, all the bad news is a lie.
That's true. Yep. All right, Lucas. Let's talk tarantulas. I
might just go and make a
Well, there are around 900 species of the hairy, creepy, ugly spider, and most of them are the usual black or brown colour. But there's more than a few of them that have vibrant blue colourings, and we don't really know why, do we?
No, basically. That's the story.
That's it. Moving on.
And this is another one of those moments that when they've looked at these tarantulas, they've found that a fairly a fairly common colouring on these tarantulas is blue, and it's not necessarily they're blue all their lives, or it's all the males are blue or all the females are blue. In some of them, they're only blue as juveniles. Some of them are blue just on their belly. Some are blue all over. But what's really interesting about it is the blue that they are is pretty much the same blue right across all these different groupings. So there's about 40 out of 53 groupings of tarantulas that have got these blue colours. And what these scientists have found is that the blue, the way that they achieve this blue, the way that they make this blue, appears to have evolved at least 8 different times. So they have different approaches to the blue. They're all sort of variations of the same theme. I mean, most colours...
But 8 separate times.
8 separate times.
So like convergent evolution again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So there's 8 separate times that have resulted then in around 50 different groupings of tarantula with some sort of
blue
colouring them. The same blue, and it's within about 20 nanometers of the 450 nanometer wavelength, which is very, very specific. You might call it Tarantula Blue. It's very, very specific to them.
And I will.
Go ahead then. So if you look at blue in the animal kingdom, generally speaking, it's not actually all that common. I mean, you can think of some birds, peacocks, and so forth that have got blue. There's various,
whales. Blue whales.
Not really blue. They're kind of bluish, but they're not sort of a deep, sort of iridescent blue that you think of. And there's certain fish that have got those blues. There's some butterflies, for example, but it's not overwhelmingly common, like reds and yellows and oranges and all the other colours that are out there, even green, particularly in the in birds and fish. So blue itself is sort of rare among the animal kingdom. It's out there, it's certainly there, but it's not very common. But what is interesting about blue is most animals that have got blue colouring tend to make it in a structural way. It's really hard to make blue pigments. So most animals that have got blue have got some kind of way of either layering feathers or positioning scales or hairs or whatever in such a way that the combined layers of these hairs, feathers or scales results in blue light being reflected back to the observer. So it's kind of an interesting way of making the colour. If you, for example, there's a particular butterfly that has this very common blue colouring in it, and this particular butterfly, I can't remember the name of it. It was in this. There was the
morpho butterfly or something, wasn't it?
Something like that. Yeah. Sorry, the
butterfly.
Yeah, so this particular butterfly, its blue is achieved in much the same way. It's made by these hairs that are sort of layered in such a way that they're very particular spacing between the hairs, and then that spacing itself causes this almost like a resonance of reflectivity, so that each layer reinforces the wavelength over and over and over again. So you end up with a very rich blue. If you took this butterfly's wings and sort of compressed all the layers, the blue would completely disappear, because it's been caused in this way. I mean, you think of the blue of the sky, that's caused by Rayleigh scattering. So it's actually just wavelengths of light that are being bounced off things in the air in just the right sort of wavelength to make it look blue.
Yep.
So the tarantulas do it in much the same way. They usually do it with hairs in layers or patterns in such a way to reinforce in that sort of way. Some of them have got sort of spongy fillings inside their hairs that cause this spacing to occur. Other ones just have their hairs in the right place and the right layers and so forth. But as I mentioned, there's about 8 different ways that they do it, and they're very different to each other. So that's interesting, because that would tend to suggest that it has some purpose. It's not just some random genetic mutation that just hasn't been dropped because it didn't confer a disadvantage. So what's also interesting is why. Yeah. Tarantulas don't really have much in the way of colour sight. In fact, their sight generally is quite poor. You tend to think of spiders with all their eyes as being quite good at seeing, but tarantulas use a whole lot of other mechanisms to hunt. They've got, their hairs are particularly attuned to any vibrations and so forth. So they don't really rely on their eyes. So it's nothing to do with them mating, it would appear. It's nothing to do with them groupings of them or any of that sort of thing. And often the colours on their belly as well, which is a little bit weird. What the team have proposed, and it is just an idea because they've been quite open and honest in the fact that they don't really know why this would occur. All they know is it appears to have occurred for a reason, but they're proposing maybe it's something to do with camouflage. And when I read this, I thought, the initial reaction
in
is,
the ocean.
You read and you think, why blue?
Yeah.
And then, I read on and it's a case of, well, it's not, you think of most blue animals and it's quite an iridescent blue. It kind of, it's very reflective. The tarantulas are not like that. They're not shiny at all. They've got this incredible blue color, but it's not at all reflective as sort. Yeah. So that actually made me start thinking of there's urban camouflage uniforms that are used by military all around the world, and it's kind of a mix of deep blues and greys. If you put someone wearing the stereotypical black burglar costume, you put them silhouetted against dark, a relatively dark background like a building, they will stand out because their very, very dark colour or lack of colour, I should say, is a contrast, and that's what camouflage is all about. It's about limiting the contrast. So maybe this blue pattern provides some kind of advantage. Depending on what they're actually hunting, these things will tend to sort of spend most of the time in leaf litter or in shallow burrows or whatever. So if you think of them sort of coming out and being on top of their prey, potentially that might give them some sort of advantage against the disrupted sort of background of the trees and the sky above them. Who knows? But it's certainly an idea. But yeah, just really, really cool that it's 8 different times with 8 different approaches to achieving the blue, which is unusual.
Extraordinary. It's amazing. I also liked at the end of the article by Ed Yong in The Atlantic, they sort of talk about how these are structural colours as opposed to a pigment or a dye of something. It's like you say, a layering of hairs or something to reflect light in a certain way. And so it could be something that we then use to make TVs that have certain vibrancy and brightness, but are viewable from all angles as opposed to sort of a narrow focus, if you make sense.
Yeah, I chose to leave that out of what I was saying because
I'm sticking it back in.
It almost felt like the mandatory nod to see science is delivering value to your everyday life.
I had the same thought. This justifies our research because televisions,
because TV, and it was like, get on that then.
But it's also, I think, it gives us a better understanding or a better way of thinking about camouflage and things like that as well. So I think it's knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but it could have interesting ramifications in a bunch of different fields, which is
it could make your TV hard to find in a forest at night.
Which is important to me.
It is.
All right. Penny, an international team of scientists has found that the arrival of agriculture in Europe about 8,500 years ago signalled the start of some significant changes in the DNA of modern humans. We saw changes in height, digestion, immune system, skin colour, a host of things. It was a really significant time in our evolution, wasn't it?
It's a huge thing. And this study was particularly looking at Europeans, because obviously the trajectory of world history is different in different places. And what's happened in Europe is for a long time the people who were living in Europe were hunter-gatherers, so we're talking tens of thousands of years. But about 8,500 years ago, the first farmers came in from the Near East. And so there was, I think, from what I think they go around and round and round with this topic, but like a physical group of people came to Europe, and we can sort of see their DNA flowing in. But so did the idea of farming. And that idea, as well as the gene flow, changed the process of natural selection that's happening. And as always, we tend to forget that natural selection is happening to humans and it's happening to us, and it's happened in the recent past. And I'm not going to go into every single gene and thing that's changed. But what this study has done, and this is something that I've always found fascinating, and I love the intersection between archaeology and genetics and other sciences, is it's looked at about, I think, 230 people. So the DNA of 230 ancient skeletons from 8,500 to about 2,500 years ago. So this is a huge sample size.
Terrific,
a huge number of ancient genomes. Like, if you actually think about what's happening or what is involved in this, it should blow your mind that we can see the genomes of someone from 8,500 years ago, of all these ancient Europeans. Anyway, so what this huge data set does is it's allowed the researchers to track different genetic variations. So they look at some people who migrated in from Russia about 4,500 years ago, Anatolians So from Turkey about 8,500 years ago. And I did my honours thesis on archaeology in Anatolia at about that time in the Neolithic of the birth of agriculture.
Cool.
So it's just a really fascinating sort of step in human history, this transition, a huge transition. I'd say as big as the sort of the technological transition we're in now from hunter-gatherer to agricultural. So what's happened? What are all these genes that are changing? And there's one that's pretty well known, is that Europeans are pretty good at digesting milk, whereas people of other backgrounds aren't necessarily, especially if in their culture dairy farming has not been around for a long time. So there's LCT, a gene that aids milk digestion, and that gene is obviously a humongous advantage if you're in an environment with a lot of cows, because if you can get protein from milk, I mean, it's a whole other source of protein. You don't have to kill the cow to get it, and so on. But that gene, and this is a nice reminder in how natural selection happens, it didn't appear when farming started. Natural selection can't select on something that's not there. So this change only seemed to happen about 4,000 years ago. So that's not that long, you know.
No, not if we go back to 8,500 years ago.
That's a
the start
big
of
lag
agriculture.
from agriculture to being able to get the most, or what we presume is the most, out of digesting milk. But it's not all like a win-win story. It also shows the compromises that are made in terms of survival. So if you have a diet based almost entirely on wheat and crop products, as look, I've tended to at times in my life, you are at the risk, surprisingly enough, of getting low doses of nutrients. And there's a gene, and I'll just look, called SLC22A4, so another one of those catchy names. And what that does is it increases the absorption of a certain amino acid that's found in low levels in wheat and other crops. So great. If you have that gene, you can get more nutrition from your wheat. You're more likely to survive if you're eating a largely wheat-based diet. Okay. However, you're also more likely, linked to it is a variation that means you're more likely to get something like irritable bowel syndrome.
Okay.
So there's an evolutionary payoff there. Irritable bowel syndrome is probably not going to kill you before you reproduce.
But that increased nutritional value will help you get to be able to reproduce healthily. Yeah.
So
wow. Okay.
Sucks for some people, and there's all sorts of. I mean, it does, but these diseases are sort of payoffs. There's all sorts of diseases that are kind of payoff survival situations.
Of course, that's evolution. It's a matter of trade-offs, and
it is. And I think it's fascinating. It's things like skin color, height, all these things seem to have been altered by agriculture.
Yeah.
I also was interested in the height differences that were found with this. They found that originally the Northern Europeans were quite tall, and they inherited these genes from two different groups. But in Southern Europe, apparently the people there started to basically get shorter after they started farming.
Well, you wouldn't expect that.
Bizarre.
Yeah, you'd expect them to have better nutrition and then get bigger.
Well, the other thing is
benefit to being closer to the ground than you were
and that's why I chose not to touch that one, because I haven't fully grasped all the implications.
Counterintuitive.
Remember also that genes indicate potential.
Yeah.
So even though you have these genes, they may not have expressed that tallness fully until nutrition was better. But yeah, it could be sexual selection, which is a bit more arbitrary than natural selection.
And also evolution doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough.
Exactly.
And I hear people ask, so are we still evolving? And it's like there's this preconception that evolution is always a step towards perfection. Mm-hmm. And have we stopped evolving? Are we perfect now? Or are we going to get even better, sort of thing? Which I think people need to remember, that it just has to be good enough. But this is an incredible study, and it's also made possible by two things, I think. There's that large sample size, those 230 skeletons, but also just the progress that we've made in gene sequencing, that you can sequence 230 genomes in a relatively short time, compare them, look for differences, and draw conclusions. It's extraordinary. It's a very cool story.
I was also surprised because I thought that aged samples made it really, really hard to get DNA that was of any kind of use. But I guess it's within the, as you say, the sequencing technologies now have just extended that dramatically.
I think DNA starts decaying significantly around 6,000 years or so. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. But that still leaves a few thousand years of good quality genomes and a few thousand years of not quite right quality genome, where you'd be able to get enough information, if not necessarily all of it.
Yeah.
Especially if they know the bits of the genome that they're looking for.
Yeah, true. All right, well, that's our show. And as usual, all the links are on the web at scienceontop.com/210. And we appreciate your thoughts and feedback, so please leave us a comment or send us an email, feedback@scienceontop.com, or catch us on the social media. And thank you for joining me, Lucas and Penny.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Penny.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
Don't move.
I don't
Stay
like
there.
spiders. Please, I don't like spiders.
Now this,
I don't like...
and they're found. Now, we don't want them to fight, so we're going to put one there, too. Now, oh, dude. Wait. Oh, God, again. Get there. Now, these are called Mexican white knee and red knee tarantulas. Their fangs are about an inch long, but they can't kill you. They'll inject a little bit of venom. It'll feel like you're at a Dave Matthews concert. You're like, whoa, dude, whoa. You're totally fine. Breathe,
Dude, I'm
breathe.
freaking out.
You're
honestly,
so cool.
I'm freaking out. I hate spiders. It's like scaring me, man.
They're not spiders. They're tarantulas.
Tarantulas.
Now this is where they are like, look, she's got webbing. Look at the webbing. Do you see the webbing?
Get off me right now. Get them both off me right now, please. Oh my gosh. Someone, seriously.
No, you're fine.
I'm not kidding, man.
You're fine.
Let's go to commercial or something.
Hang on, I'm getting there.
Let's go to commercial.
You're okay. No, you're good. What? Hang on. Well, hang on. Oh, she pooped. Just mix it. You're right. No, you're totally fine.
Oh my Lord.
You're all right.
That was the most frightening thing ever happened in my
You're fine.
lifetime.
I'm moving on.